Hyenas, a PvPvE extraction shooter from Creative Assembly, was around and then it wasn't, all in a flash. In the same quick and bombastic fashion Hyenas entered this world we call ours, it exited, actually never having launched in the first place. While the game was only revealed to be publicly playable in the fall of 2023, it was cancelled abruptly in September of 2023, just a few months later. The true story behind the fall of Hyenas, however, spans much further back than that, and includes a story many fans of the series might be familiar with in a way. A project with limitless possibilities and a high budget left to its devices. So what happened to Hyenas, and why was it unable to even just cross the finish line, for launching, for example? On this episode of Death of a Game, we cover a relatively unknown game that went on to become one of Sega's biggest and most expensive failures ever. Pay attention to the clues along the way as we navigate through the timeline and obtain the evidence needed to then do a final deduction at the end of the video solving the case. Without any more belaboring, this is the story of Hyenas and its premature death. I would like to welcome a new sponsor to the channel, Fume. Fume helps people switch from a bad habit to a good habit. Fume is a diffusive device that allows you to breathe through the Fume device and enjoy various flavors. But switching to Fume is easy, enjoyable, and even fun. Fume has served over 100,000 customers and has thousands of success stories, and there's no reason that cannot be you. Fume just recently released some new cores on its website on June 30th. Orange Vanilla, which is sweet and citrusy with a touch of classic vanilla, Raspberry Lemon, which is a full-bodied lemonade with hints of berries, and Sparkling Grapefruit, which is fresh and cooling grapefruit. Not only are these new cores tasty, they're easy to install. Because the Fume features an adjustable airflow, which is great to fidget with, and it's also just easy to use. It even makes a nice clicking sound. Join Fume in accelerating humanity's breakup from destructive habits by picking up the Journey Pack today. Head to tryfume.com/nerdslayer or scan the QR code and use code nerdslayer to get 10% off when you get the Journey Pack today. That's tryfum.com and use code nerdslayer to save an additional 10% off of your order today. Now let's get to the mystery. The story of the retro arcade space pirate-esque PvPvE shooter begins far back than people might imagine, starting as a codename Project Keaton as far back as 2017. Development would also be slow going at Creative Assembly, the famous studio behind the Total War franchise, as they were finishing the development of Halo Wars 2. The confusing part about Creative Assembly, which is a subsidiary of Sega, is that they aren't just one team. There's a TW team in Sofia, Bulgaria, there's one in the UK, the main office, and there's also the one in question, which is the third team, dubbed the console team, behind the hit success horror game Alien Isolation. They would be tasked with creating an all-new shooter IP, which was quite the task for a studio with little shooter experience as a whole and little experience creating their own IP. But coming off the major success of Alien Isolation meant that the console team had a lot of support and confidence going into their next project. Development would prove to be rocky from the beginning though, as true with many stories on my channel, and rocky is kind of an understatement, as there would be a complete divide amongst the team behind the unannounced shooter project concerning which engine should be used. According to my sources, the team was split on using the popular industry standard Unreal 4 or their in-house engine. The debate got so fierce that an executive decision was ultimately made, and the decision was to use UE4. This led to many members leaving the team. We're talking about members of over 5 to 8 years, because of, according to my sources, decision-making on Project Keaton and Creative Assembly in general had been more democratic. This would also greatly slow down development, requiring essentially an entire remake and a new engine. The CA console team would shift fully to Unreal 4 by 2020 and focus largely their efforts on core design of the game, including hiring UE4 technicians to assist in the matter. Although UE was an industry standard, that doesn't mean that everyone in the industry was using it. CA had their own in-house engine that they had been using for a while. They were being forced to learn an all-new engine. If you're wondering why executives went through with that decision, the idea is that probably it's easier to hire and train people for Unreal than it would be for an in-house engine. Still, doing such would be slowing down development so much that it would take the CA console team an entire extra 2 years to get to what they would be calling Hyenas, their unique IP shooter, to a playable state. This is actually quite impressive, especially given the fact that I was told that there wasn't any crunch forced at all. But that would still mean that the game had been worked on for a total of 3 years, making each passing year an additional one, right? That's how years in math works. But further elongating the development cycle is kind of my point. This makes things complicated in the ways of budgeting and cost, but also in terms of vision and delivering on a proper product. The expectations become much higher. And expectations can be deadly. Hyenas would be revealed by Sega June 22nd, 2022, and according to my sources, the game had about 2 years of solid development under its belt, not counting the 3 previous years overall. Sega would announce Hyenas as a multiplayer, multi-team heist experience set in space with a punky comic book aesthetic. Hyenas would allow for up to 5 teams of 3 on the same map, duking it out for what would appear to be retro loot that the rich people who fled Earth to Mars are interested in, and I assume you are bartering with them as those left behind on that destroyed Earth. Hyenas was talking about heist, but was at the very least sounding like an extraction shooter, with the concept in the game of robbing vaults and taking that loot and skedaddling. But visually, the game was looking straight out of Borderlands, and some people saw this as negative, as the style hadn't been historically doing well at that time in gaming, and it was kind of just trendy. However, Hyenas wanted to be exciting and eye-catching, and part of what made Hyenas so visually impressive was the quality of the game's animations, colors, and the gameplay. It really did handle as good as it looked. Attempting a comic punk style is difficult, as it's hard to make the cast come across as anything other than angsty and apathetic, and it's hard to relate to for the majority of players. Overwatch, for example, counterbalanced its comic punk stylings with some fairly realistic looking characters by comparison, even in the environments themselves. Hyenas looked like it was just all in on comic punk, which was always going to have mixed results, as going all in on any sort of bombastic and colorful style is going to. Coming from a team who had just worked on a semi-realistic alien thriller title, it did also seem like quite the contrast and departure. Because of such, there were serious concerns if Hyenas would actually be able to make its diverse cast believable, and most importantly, likable. Hyenas would enter alpha sometime shortly after. A year after the game was announced, the lead game director on Hyenas, David Nicholson, would be relieved of his position reportedly. This is interesting because not only has this not been publicly stated or claimed, I have multiple sources claiming this at this point, that in the summer of 2023, a managerial shift happened and David Nicholson was one of those shifted. According to his LinkedIn though, he still works for Creative Assembly and still claimed to be the director of the game. My theory on this happening is that because Sega wasn't happy with how things were going and dragging for Hyenas, especially with how expensive the game was becoming, they decided to shift leadership around on the project behind the scenes. Part of my reason for believing this is that there was still some debate going on between CA and Sega concerning what the business model of Hyenas should be. Now, debate is a normal, healthy part of life, no matter how many times that people try to argue otherwise, ironically. The issue with debating the business model of Hyenas was that the game was set to launch any month now, and they were still unsure about which business model would be the best. When you have a game that's just hemorrhaging money and you don't know how to sell it, that's a big problem. According to my sources, Sega was interested in a buy-to-play model due to wanting more profit front-loaded. CA, on the other hand, was urging and desiring a free-to-play model to be competitive with other shooters of the time. This sounds eerily similar to another failed multiplayer shooter on the Death of a Game series, Lawbreakers. Lawbreakers also was caught in the crossfire of the debate over the business model. The publisher of Lawbreakers, Nexon, urged the title into being a free-to-play one, while the developers actually preferred for it to be a buy-to-play one, and the game failed fairly quickly, with many players citing the price tag as the reason for such. So it's not like publishers always make the wrong decision, but in this case, Sega not wanting to make the game free-to-play might not actually be a bad argument. Now hear me out. While Hunt, Showdown, and Escape from Tarkov are both buy-to-play titles, they have been around for ages at this point, and aren't good comparisons to, say, Hyenas to be a comparable price. With shooters trending more and more towards free-to-play business models, not naming the major shooter series that are already in circulation, it was going to be hard for Hyenas to see success with such a strong barrier. Not an insurmountable one, however. As if Hyenas was worth the price tag, people would pay it, surely. And them teaming up with Xbox to go on the Xbox Game Pass would greatly help matters too. By the summer of 2023, Hyenas was slightly known by fans, but not very clearly. The game had been carted on and off the roadway so many times, seemingly, players were unsure if it was even going to launch. Gamescom August 2023 would prove to be a super crucial moment for Hyenas, and what the future of the game was set to be. Although the feedback was rather mixed throughout the alpha and beta tests, it wasn't straight negative. In fact, it was rather positively trending, and there was something to work with there. Gamescom was Hyenas' chance to impress publicly and show out, and they would elect to show a cinematic trailer, a call to more old-school times instead. According to my sources, many of the developers preferred to show off actual gameplay, not only because it's better received at a convention, but because they felt that the beauty of Hyenas was the actual gameplay of it. While Hyenas' reception wasn't poor, it was very mixed. Most players and journalists alike just weren't really sure what kind of game it was supposed to be. And for those that were aware, they were critical of the general rendition of such. The core concept of Hyenas had never changed throughout its history. It was a PvPvE extraction-style shooter where you were tasked with escaping with the loot. The loot was retro arcade gear though, that's kind of the catch, like the Sega Genesis for example. The vast majority of those that I've seen who played Hyenas didn't actually enjoy this particular ecosystem or economy, and I think that that's partly because it just doesn't make sense. You're telling me that there's enough random old consoles to serve as currency for rich people who left the planet after a horrible catastrophe? Why didn't they just take them in the first place, since they're locked up in vaults and stuff? There's no true sense of survival either brought in Hyenas, and although the game has aspects of a heist-style game, it doesn't actually feel like a heist. There's no real stakes, because so much of the game is trivialized by how it looks and how it's presented, and well, how phony the world feels. You have this diverse set of characters all supposedly working together due to the needs of the world in their own. But it's not a well fleshed out world, nor a believable one. At least that's the MMO formula. Extraction shooters don't have to have true long-term progression per se, and can usually get away with having not tons of lore or story, but I think that the difference here is that with the competitors like Hunt Showdown and Escape from Tarkov, is that the gameplay and the premise just worked better. This is more proof that a proper game design and gameplay loop is more important than being a flashy looking game with amazing gameplay. Because I would actually argue that Hyenas plays better than both of these games that I mentioned, which is especially impressive for Creative Assembly's first unique IP shooter. But just having better gameplay, as we have shown with our previous example Lawbreakers, isn't good enough. Players also have to be bought into the concept of the game itself, and proper character design is how Overwatch, for example, was able to get players to buy into it. In Hyenas, it truly feels like the team tried to create a character for every stereotype or pop cultural reference. Not only did you have the self-inserted Sonic-looking character straight out of Sega, Hero Kai, which I actually think is kind of funny, but seemingly odd regardless. You even have a more rainbow cast of characters, with an astronaut character, a ballerina, a drag queen, a tech dad, and more. And if it sounds like I'm just listing types of people, I'm not. These are what the characters' personalities and looks encompass. Just watch these character trailers on screen and compare them to Overwatch or even Champion Spotlights in League. They feel like comic pop style characters, sure, except that random stereotypes just seem randomly pulled from our world and introduced into their world. Did I mention how their world is also called the Taint? It's like when it came to world building, nobody thought any of this mattered. And even then, there's some positives with Hyenas, but people weren't able to see it because of these problems. The problem isn't even picking controversial characters either before anybody makes that argument or tries to shoehorn that into this argument. It's more like, how do those stereotypes really apply in the same way when the entire concepts of society doesn't really exist anymore or not in the same realm? It's like getting mad in Tron if a robot starts having a conversation with you. Sega would admit to having difficulties with Hyenas by the end of August 2023, and when asked for an update on Hyenas would state that we are unable to talk about this title because the details have not yet been announced at this time. As this is a challenging title, we are striving to improve its quality towards the release on the front line of development. We are also making final adjustments to its business model in parallel, which felt like the last thing you wanted to hear about a game that was already stuck in development hell. Hyenas would continue on with their closed beta August 31st, 2023, and although the Steam page has now been brought down for Hyenas, I was able to find the closed beta page, and saw that only a mere 2,200 players would attempt to play Hyenas. Now, some closed betas are designed to be a bit more exclusive, but with the game having technically already 6 years of development, and maybe even 3 years since the new engine, my guess is that, for Sega executives, they were expecting far more progress and excitement. That would explain why the web would be shocked, in a move rarely seen in the series, as Sega would cancel Hyenas altogether the end of September of 2023. The press release concerning the cancellation was rather vague, especially as to the reasons to why. Not that that's atypical, but it was very generally stated in the release that the downturn in profit across the European sector was the culprit. But according to my sources, it was likely due to simply how long development had been carrying on at that point. When development kicks on for a while without much productivity to show for it, it becomes a sunk cost where developers then start to feel like, well, now we have to ship this game, success or not, rain or shine. This becomes difficult because then in order for the project to become successful, it has to be doubly, maybe even triply successful, to make up for the delays and expenses in development. Hyenas, according to two of my sources, was canned because Sega didn't see it becoming profitable, and certainly had little faith in actually launching the product fully. I feel conflicted, because on one hand I feel for the team who never got the chance to fail, which many wrote to me concerning that exact thing, wanting the chance to fail even if that's what they were going to do. At the same time, development on the project had been carrying on for far too long, and there were no concerns of crunch or even poor leadership being raised. It seemed like the team and executives just kept spinning their gears hoping that something would eventually happen. The news wouldn't just result in the canceling of Hyenas either, it would also lead to layoffs at the company. And it's not quite sure whose idea Hyenas ultimately was, but if it wasn't the devs' idea, that would be a tougher pill to swallow. And just like that, before it even launched after nearly 6 years of development and multiple dozens of millions as a reported budget to waste, Hyenas was canned. It was being called Sega's biggest failure, which goes to show the level of expectation that was being placed on the project to begin with, and well, just how much it cost. Not only was it being called the biggest failure, it was being called the most expensive failure, reportedly being the most expensive game for Sega to ever develop. This really sells our previous reasons for why Sega had to can the project. At least in their eyes, it had gone on for far too long and was costing way too much money, simply put. It should be mentioned that even canceling Hyenas as late as the fall of 2023, the monetization for the game was still never finalized. This was a serious red flag, and it tells me that there were internal discussions and debates that were still ongoing late into the development concerning such. My guess is that there were disagreements with Sega concerning it as well, especially when I remember the monetization in extraction shooters is not typical monetization, as it has things like insurance, so you would probably want to know how it works before you would buy into the game. Hyenas never having a solidified monetization plan probably scared many players away from ever even trying it in the first place, because I personally wouldn't play an extraction shooter that doesn't have a clear business model either. The music is hitting, which means that early or not, it's time to put this case to rest, detectives. Not all mysteries are long and have winding turns, some are just short and sweet. Some are more about the same problems and patterns being repeated again, and in slightly different ways, resulting in the same unfortunate ending and place on the series. But why did Hyenas get killed before it even launched? Development dragged on for a long time and it was expensive. There were difficulties creating a new IP on a new engine. Issues with monetization. A lack of identity and a proper, believable gameplay loop. And just like that, Creative Assembly's first unique IP and Sega's biggest failure, poof, gone. And it wasn't around long enough or charming enough for players to have a long or strong memory of it. Instead, Hyenas will likely fade into the obscurity as another failed extraction shooter that, in an attempt to cash in, somehow missed what made the title special in the first place: simplicity and true risk. Thanks for watching.